Maxine Waters walked into the House Oversight Committee chamber projecting an aura of complete ownership, which largely mirrored her actual standing after 32 years serving in Congress. Having outlasted multiple presidential terms, survived controversies, and beaten rivals using sheer grit and vocal power, the former financial services chair was someone who made executives pause and colleagues back down. Her designer outfit was estimated to cost $4,000, a sum exceeding the monthly earnings of the majority of her constituents. The diamond earrings she modeled caught the glare whenever she haughtily turned her face, while her hairstyle remained flawlessly arranged and her cosmetics were impeccably done. She was dressed for a battle, or maybe outfitted to communicate that she stood entirely above the fray. She was completely oblivious to the reality that her daughter had cooperated with federal investigators for 4 months. She was entirely unaware that the digital messages she thought were permanently deleted had been pulled from backup systems. She had no idea that before the afternoon ended, the political dynasty she built over 3 decades would collapse around her like a flimsy shack in a hurricane. The Congresswoman assumed her position in the witness chair, looking much like a queen tolerating a tedious assembly of regular citizens. She scanned the committee members, taking in the conservative lawmakers she despised along with the liberal colleagues who feared her, experiencing nothing but contempt. Dan Bongino sat at the examiner's table with a mountain of folders in front of him. He was a former Secret Service operative and NYPD cop, a blue-collar native of Queens who devoted his career to protecting commanders-in-chief and catching criminals. She stared back at him and saw a complete nobody, a failed law enforcement official who became a web commentator, and a man who accomplished nothing she considered impressive. She was completely wrong about that particular presumption, too. "Let me be crystal clear," she proclaimed before anyone else could manage to speak, allowing her tone to fill the space with the practiced authority of 3 decades. "I am sitting here against my will since this panel holds no legitimate authority to question a sitting congressional representative about lawfully protected political activities." The investigator had not uttered a single sound yet, as he was simply watching her and patiently waiting for his moment. "I have committed 32 years to this country, battling for civil rights, for economic fairness, and for the destitute and ignored populations that Washington overlooks. I decline to be lectured by a failed federal bodyguard who was unable to make it in genuine law enforcement." She adjusted her costly glasses and looked at him with undisguised disgust. "I have faced down prejudiced individuals, I have taken on conservatives, and I have challenged commanders-in-chief, so do you genuinely believe I am afraid of you?" She let out a laugh, and it was certainly not a pleasant sound. "Are we finally done with this dramatic performance? Because I have real responsibilities to handle, and I am taking back the floor." The chamber waited for a reaction while he stayed quiet. He sat perfectly still with his fingers interlocked, watching her outburst with the patience of a guy who spent decades defending leaders from dangers far deadlier than an arrogant politician. When he ultimately spoke, his voice was calm and almost soft. "Have you finished, Representative?" "I will be done when I decide I am done, and I am taking back my—" "No." The rejection cut across the chamber sharply. "You are not allowed to take back a single thing today, ma'am. Neither your floor privileges, nor your reputation, nor your legacy." He opened the first folder, stating that everything she had taken over the past 32 years, encompassing every cent, every favor, and every ounce of trust her constituents placed in her, actually belonged to someone else. He held up a document and declared that today those people were taking it all back. He let that declaration hang in the air for a moment. $1.2 million is the total your political operation has paid out to your daughter Karen over the course of your tenure for supposedly managing mail advertisements. He dropped the file onto the desk, noting that her child, her political money, and her household's monetary history were exposed right there on paper. Her eyelids fluttered for just a moment, exposing a tiny crack in her armor. "And ma'am, that is just the beginning, since we haven't even touched on the mansion, the financial institution bailout, or the $12 million your spouse's business secured because of your calls." He smiled, although it was far from a friendly look. "So please tell me again about taking back your floor privileges, because I really want to hear all about it." The examiner arranged his documents with methodical precision, keeping each page tagged, every detail sequenced, and all arguments prepared for the politician who thought she could talk her way out of anything. Let's start with a simple idea, Representative. Let's talk about your child, Karen. The politician's facial expression turned hard. My child runs a legitimate business that provides support to multiple election efforts. $1.2 million, he repeated, letting the massive number float in the room. That is the total amount your election efforts and affiliated political action committees have paid to Karen Waters throughout your time in office. $1.2 million for advertising pamphlets, he noted as he pulled out billing statements spanning 20 years. Now, for the viewers watching remotely who might not grasp what a promotional flyer is, let me explain. It is simply a piece of paper, a list of politicians that a voter might want to support. You print it, you mail it out, and folks throw it away in the trash. It is incredibly simple and exceedingly cheap, he stated while showing an example. This is a campaign mailer, one lone piece of paper featuring dual-color ink and a basic layout. The normal cost for designing and shipping these, according to business standards, is about $2 to $3 each for a typical election order. He brought out the billing documents submitted by her daughter. Your kid charges approximately $15 to $20 a piece, which equals 5 to 10 times the going rate for the exact same product. The Congresswoman leaned forward aggressively. My daughter provides premium labor, targeted outreach, and tactical advantages. The investigator slowly bobbed his head. Let's examine that premium labor, he remarked as he pulled out business registration forms. Her company goes by the name Progressive Connections, and I looked into it by checking the state filings, the commercial licenses, and the employee records. He spread the documents out on the desk. The number of full-time workers aside from your daughter is exactly 0. The headquarters location is just her home address. The corporate equipment is made up of a single computer and a basic printer. These represent premium offerings delivered by a single person working out of her living room, charging 10 times what professional firms ask. He glared at her, declaring that it wasn't a real business, but rather a cash funneling operation with a fancy name. How dare you, she yelled, slamming her palm onto the table. My kid has built a successful— Allow me to explain what an actual political strategy firm looks like, he interrupted, pulling out files from legitimate organizations. A real firm has employees, client managers, graphic designers, and analytics experts. They keep commercial spaces with overhead costs, they hold tech licenses, and they have a diverse roster by working with multiple candidates in different races. He held up her daughter's commercial permit. Your relative's enterprise has absolutely none of those features. It features a single worker who is herself, a lone customer who is you, and a solitary good which is highly inflated printed material. This doesn't qualify as a strategy firm. It is a straight pipeline from your political accounts into your household's bank accounts. He brought forth more transaction records. Let's look at the timing of these payouts, as every single large transfer to her perfectly matches a massive expense in her personal affairs. During March of 2017, she bought a brand new car. Then in April of 2017, your political committee wired her $92,000 for supposed advanced constituent communication. He presented yet another document. In September 2019, your daughter put down a deposit for a getaway property in Palm Springs. By October 2019, your operation gave her $115,000 for online interaction advising. He mapped out the timeline, noting that the whole setup ran like clockwork. She needs money, the political committee suddenly needs help, the invoices appear, the transactions process, and the funds land in her bank right on time. He looked up at the other panel members. This represents a personal stipend instead of a valid election cost. It serves as a massive allowance funded by people who genuinely thought they were supporting a civic cause. Let's check the efficiency metrics, the former agent said while pulling out market comparisons. I looked into what other candidates pay for the exact same jobs, and the numbers are right here. The National Party's Congressional Committee spends $3.40 for each piece. The state-level party organization shells out $2 to $90 per flyer. The senior senator's election team is billed $3.20 per unit. He set the comparative data down on the desk. Meanwhile, your relative demands $18.50 per piece. That equals 500% higher than what the political organization pays for the exact same paper, the exact same ink, and the exact same mailing costs. He made eye contact with the congressional panel. A specific word exists for giving family members hugely exaggerated sums for jobs that could be done elsewhere for a sliver of the price. That word is fraud. The lawmaker's tone rose to a borderline shout, insisting she was taking back her floor privileges and refusing to listen to this. You are going to listen today, ma'am, because for the first instance in 32 years, someone else is getting the chance to talk. The examiner took out a new piece of evidence. Let's look at the compensation timeline, because during each voting season, the transfers to your daughter increased like clockwork. During 2016, the total hit $85,000. In 2018, it reached $112,000. By 2020, it grew to $145,000. And for 2022, it climbed to $168,000. He traced the upward curve on the page. Your operational spending goes up every 2 years, and miraculously, your kid's share of the cash always jumps up too, which is quite the amazing fluke. He brought out a printed electronic message. This message comes from your political manager to your accounting lead on March 15, 2018, so let me recite it. He read the text slowly, making sure every single word was captured on the record. The boss wants to bump up Karen's rate this season since she needs cash for a house renovation, so throw an extra $50,000 into the printing account and call it expanded voter contact. He put the printed message back down. A house renovation means your relative's property was bankrolled by your donors, those teachers, medical staff, and working folks who gave $25 because they believed you were fighting on their behalf. He brought up yet another file. Allow me to tell you about a specific person who donated. Rosa Martinez works as a housekeeper living in your voting area, and she tidies up mansions in Hancock Park, making $15 an hour. An image appeared on the screen displaying an older Hispanic woman with tired eyes and rough palms. Rosa gave $20 every month to your political fund over 6 years, which adds up to $2,800. That represents cash she might have spent on prescriptions, on groceries, or on her own family. The investigator did the math out loud for everyone to hear. Do you realize what $1,800 buys from your child's business? It covers about 100 pages, simply 100 junk flyers that went straight into the trash can. He stared directly at the politician. Rosa skipped dinners to send you money, and you funneled her cash into your kid's fake enterprise to pay for property upgrades. That does not qualify as public service, ma'am. That is straight-up theft. The Congresswoman's composure was breaking apart. The payouts to my child are completely legal. Legal and ethical represent two very different ideas, just like legal and moral are completely separate concepts. You have spent 32 years exploiting the massive gap between what the law allows and what is actually right. He closed that particular section of his folder. But your child isn't the only family member who got rich off your position, so let's talk about your husband, let's look at the financial institution, and let's review $12 million in taxpayer cash. The investigator flipped open a new tab in his binder. This specific section contained property documents, photographs, and monetary ledgers. Before we tackle the federal bailout, I want to paint a picture for the folks watching, since understanding where you live helps us figure out who you really are. He pulled out a physical image. This is your house, ma'am, located over on Windsor Boulevard in the Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. It features 6 sleeping quarters, 6 washrooms, an outdoor pool, and a 3-bay parking structure. It boasts a perfectly trimmed yard maintained by professional landscaping crews. The modern market valuation sits at approximately $6.1 million. The photo flashed onto the room's screens, displaying a massive property surrounded by tropical trees and luxury cars parked out front. It certainly is a beautiful home, the kind of place the vast majority of citizens can only dream of owning. It is the exact type of property that announces you have finally made it to the top. He then brought up a graphical presentation. There is just one major problem here, which is that this residence doesn't actually sit inside your voting district. He pointed toward the boundary lines clearly drawn on the graphic. The state's 43rd congressional territory covers Watts, Willowbrook, and large parts of South Los Angeles. Those happen to be some of the poorest communities found anywhere in the state. The average family earnings hover around $44,000, while the typical house goes for about $280,000. He traced his finger along the political boundaries. And over here, several miles distant, sits Hancock Park, where average family earnings hit $153,000, and the typical property fetches $2.8 million. It does not belong to your territory, and it doesn't even border the area. He laid the diagram flat down onto the desk. You advocate for some of the most broke residents in California, yet you live right alongside some of the richest. That represents quite a massive commute, ma'am, both geographically and morally. The politician shifted her posture in her chair. Federal lawmakers are merely required to maintain a residence in their territory, so where I choose to sleep most nights is my personal. Your personal business, exactly, so let's look at that local house you maintain, he replied as he showed off more photos. Here is the property registered as your official local address. It happens to be a small structure over on West 81st Street that carries a tax assessment of about $400,000. The contrast with the massive luxury estate was incredibly stark. We looked into this location, talked to the folks nearby, and pulled the municipal power records. Do you want to know what we found out? He held up the electricity bills. The normal energy usage at your registered local address is 47 kilowatt hours every month. Are you aware of what that actually means? That proves nobody actually lives inside. A regular family burns through roughly 900 kilowatt hours every 4 weeks. Your supposed primary residence uses a mere 5% of that normal volume. He dropped the utility statements onto the desk. The bulbs turn on occasionally, probably when you have to stop by to pretend you are present, but nobody stays in that building, ma'am. It functions as a theatrical prop, serving as a paperwork trick. It is a strategy to fake the idea that you reside alongside the voters you claim to champion. He brought up more paperwork. Meanwhile, your luxury estate lists you as the primary dweller on municipal tax rolls, coverage policies, and every other legitimate document that matters. He looked at her with a look bordering on pure disgust. Let me paint the full picture for everyone. Your constituents stay in neighborhoods where bars cover their windows while you reside in a community guarded by private security teams. Your voters stress over making their rent while you enjoy a backyard swimming pool. Your voters ride public transit while you park in a 3-bay garage. He brought up DMV documents. Talking about cars, your main ride is a Mercedes-Benz S-Class luxury vehicle. The starting sticker price sits at $112,000. That sedan costs double the annual household income of your typical voter. He brought up more financial ledgers. Your wardrobe, according to photos and fashion reviews by our analysts, carries a yearly price tag of more than $60,000. Brands like Chanel, St. John, and Oscar de la Renta are featured heavily. The outfit you are currently wearing sells for roughly $4,200. He pointed toward her clothing. The lady who cleans your house, yes, we spoke with her, makes $15 an hour. It would take her 280 hours on the clock just to afford the exact garments you have on today. That equals 7 solid weeks of grinding labor just to buy one single outfit. He revealed additional luxury spending logs. Concerning your transportation expenses, we got the receipts through transparent government requests. Over the past 5 years, you have taken 17 trips flying strictly first class. The combined bill handed to your political war chest and affiliated groups exceeded $200,000. He showed off social media photographs. Here you are visiting Paris, here is the Amalfi Coast, and here is a luxury spot in Cabo San Lucas. This all happened while your voters scraped together enough change just to ride the bus to their jobs. He pulled out dining receipts obtained from public transparency files. The restaurant invoices billed to your donors were massive. In March 2021 at Spago Beverly Hills, the tab came to $427. In April 2021 at Nobu Malibu, the check was $563. By June 2021 at Providence, the total reached $600. He added up the numbers. In a single year alone, you billed your donors over $15,000 for high-end meals. Meanwhile, 22% of the kids in your district qualify for subsidized school lunches because their parents struggle to buy groceries. He put the receipts on the table. You eat at Nobu while they eat at soup kitchens, and it is entirely paid for by the exact same working people who trusted you. The politician's face flushed deep red. How I spend my personal accounts is absolutely none of your concern. It becomes your voters' concern when you got extremely rich supposedly representing them while they stayed totally broke. 32 years, ma'am. You have held this seat for 32 years. Let's review what actually changed over that massive time frame. He pulled up historical data. Back in 1991, when you first took the oath, the destitution level in your area sat at 23%. Your personal wealth was estimated at roughly $200,000. He shifted to the modern statistics. Today, in 2024, the destitution level in your area stands at 21%. It has fundamentally stayed exactly the same. Your personal wealth is now estimated at more than $4 million. He let those statistics sink in. Over 3 decades, poverty in your district moved a measly 2 points, which falls within the margin of error. It remained virtually unchanged. Yet your personal fortune multiplied by 20 times. He leaned forward. You got extremely wealthy, ma'am, while the people you advocate for remain completely destitute. They are still fighting to survive, and they are still waiting for the massive changes you promised them for 3 decades. He queued up a digital recording. Allow me to show you a quick clip. This man is James Wilson, a 67-year-old retired janitor who has lived in your territory his entire life. The screen showed an elderly African-American man sitting inside a modest home. She comes around every election cycle asking for our support, James remarked. She gives nice speeches claiming she fights for us, but I have never seen her walk down my street, never seen her at our grocery store, and never seen her at our church service. He shook his head slowly. My community looks worse today than when she first took office. The streets are falling apart, the educational system is failing, and the youth cannot find jobs. Meanwhile, she lives in a massive mansion on the completely opposite side of town. He stared directly into the camera lens. You cannot fight for individuals you refuse to even live near. You cannot understand our daily battles from the comfort of a luxury swimming pool. The clip stopped playing. The investigator turned his attention back to the Congresswoman. Your voters understand the truth, ma'am, and they always have. They just lack someone willing to say it out loud. He unsealed the next folder. Now let's talk about how you got so wealthy. Let's discuss the phone calls, the secret meetings, and the $12 million that saved your husband's financial portfolio. His voice dropped lower as he dug into the next subject. This represented the absolute core of the corruption. It stood as the most glaring example of self-enrichment during your extremely long career. During September 2008, the global financial system collapsed. Financial institutions were going under everywhere. Panic dominated the stock market. The federal government scrambled to prevent a complete fiscal meltdown. He laid out the historical context. Right in the middle of this chaos, the Treasury Department took a specific phone call. It was a direct request for a private meeting from you, ma'am. It focused entirely on one single financial institution, One United Bank. He presented the communication logs. This represents the federal agency's official record of that discussion. On September 23, 2008, the person on the line was Representative Maxine Waters. The topic was an emergency sit-down regarding One United Bank. He stared right at her. Now, hundreds of institutions were failing, maybe even thousands, but you didn't call to discuss minority-owned banks in general. You did not call to discuss your voters' access to financial tools. You called specifically to talk about One United. He pulled out another folder. Let me explain your direct connection to that specific bank. Your spouse is Sidney Williams, a former American ambassador with an impressive resume. He sat on the corporate board over at One United Bank. He held equity in One United Bank. It shows up right here in the mandatory financial disclosure packets. He scattered the documents across the table. So we have a situation where your spouse holds a direct financial stake in a specific institution. That institution is teetering on the edge of total ruin. If it fails, your spouse loses his corporate seat and his equity drops to zero. So you picked up the phone and dialed the Treasury Department. The politicians sat up defiantly. I was fighting for minority-owned financial groups that were being left out of the bailout discussions. Were you really? Because let's check the facts, the investigator replied while presenting the meeting records. The federal conference took place on September 25, 2008. The attendees included executives strictly from One United Bank and representatives from the National Bankers Association. The dialogue focused almost entirely on One United's desperate need for federal cash. He pointed to the official minutes. This wasn't about minority institutions broadly. No, this meeting was about one single entity. It was the bank where your spouse had money, the bank that would have folded without federal intervention. He showed the final result. Just 3 months later, One United Bank received $12 million from the federal TARP program. That was taxpayer cash, your voters' cash, cash that kept the doors open and protected your spouse's investment. He ran the math out loud. His equity in the company was valued around $350,000. If the institution had folded, as it surely would have without the bailout, that equity would have dropped to absolutely zero. Your phone call essentially handed $350,000 directly to your own household. Her attorney leaned in to whisper some advice, but she waved him off angrily. My husband had already stepped down from the corporate board when that meeting happened. Let's verify that timeline, the examiner said while pulling up the corporate registry. His resignation from the One United board was officially dated September 26, 2008. The federal meeting happened on September 25th, exactly 1 day earlier. He was absolutely still on the board when you scheduled the conference. He laid the chronological timeline on the desk. But let's be crystal clear about what was truly on the line here. One United Bank found itself in massive trouble. They had gambled heavily on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac assets. When those markets tanked, the bank faced catastrophic losses. Without federal cash, the institution would have crashed completely. He produced the economic analysis papers. If the bank had failed, your spouse's equity worth $350,000 would have vanished instantly. His corporate position, which paid him an annual salary of $40,000, would have evaporated. Your household was staring down the barrel of losing almost $400,000. He looked at the congressional panel. So what did the representative actually do? She refused to submit an ethics disclosure. She refused to recuse herself from the matter entirely. She picked up the phone and dialed the Treasury Department herself. She leveraged her power as a senior member of the banking committee to arrange a special meeting for one particular institution. It was the exact institution where her husband had money. He brought out more phone records, and it wasn't just a single call. We have proof of 3 separate dials from your staff to the Treasury during that 2-day window. 3 separate calls, all regarding One United, all while your spouse sat on their board and held their stock. He spread the phone records out. September 23rd was the first dial demanding the meeting. September 24th was the follow-up dial to confirm the guest list. September 29th was the dial to check the status of the federal cash application. You weren't simply advocating, you were aggressively lobbying. But even after he stepped down from the board, he still owned the stock. He still possessed a direct financial stake, and you still possessed a massive conflict of interest that you completely failed to disclose. He brought up the ethics summary report. Let's see what your own colleagues thought about this situation. The internal ethics investigation wrapped up in 2012 following 3 long years of delays. He read from the final findings. Her actions sparked serious concerns regarding the appearance of a major conflict of interest. While they didn't find enough hard evidence to prove she intentionally broke the rules, they expressed massive concerns about her failure to disclose her family's financial stake in the matter. He dropped the report onto the table. Serious concerns, appearance of a conflict, and massive concerns about disclosure failures. That is political slang for admitting you did something wrong, but they refused to punish you because you held too much power. He pulled up the voting records. The ethics panel deadlocked completely along party lines. Your political allies protected you while the investigation dragged on for years until everyone forgot about it, allowing you to walk away without a single scratch. He stared her down. Until today, that is. He produced a brand new document. This represents a phone log note written by the federal aide who fielded your call. It says the representative specifically mentioned her spouse's connection to the bank. He read the sentence again slowly. She mentioned her spouse's connection. You openly admitted the conflict to the Treasury Department. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you pushed forward anyway. The politician was physically shaking now, either from pure rage or genuine fear. It was hard to tell which emotion was driving her. I am taking back my time, and I refuse to sit here and— $12 million? That is exactly what your phone calls were worth. $12 million in taxpayer cash to bail out an institution where your spouse parked his money. He gathered up the financial rescue evidence. Your child gets over $1 million. Your spouse's portfolio is saved by a $12 million taxpayer bailout. Your personal fortune grows by millions while your voters stay totally broke. He glared at her with pure disgust. This isn't civic duty, ma'am. This is a family enrichment scheme, and your political office is just the tool you use to run it. He cracked open the next section of his files. But it isn't only about the money, is it? It is also about power, and exactly how you used it to intimidate, to threaten, and to incite. He shifted the focus from monetary corruption to something equally dangerous. Let's talk about your rhetoric, ma'am, because words matter, especially coming from a public official. They matter especially when they inspire followers to take drastic action. He pulled out a stack of previous statements. On June 23, 2018, during a rally in Los Angeles, you spoke about the current administration's border policies. Allow me to read your exact quote. He read it slowly and clearly. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, or at a gas station, you get out and you create a crowd. You push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. He set the paper down on the desk. Form a crowd, push back on them, and tell them they aren't welcome. That is exactly what you ordered your supporters to do to presidential cabinet officials. The politician shifted in her chair. I was talking about peaceful protests protected by the First Amendment. Let's see what actually happened right after you gave that speech, he replied while pulling out news articles. On June 22, 2018, just one day prior to your speech, the White House press secretary was told to leave a restaurant in Virginia. The owner explicitly stated her presence wasn't welcome. He moved to the next article. On June 25, 2018, 2 days following your speech, the Homeland Security Secretary was harassed and screamed out of a Mexican restaurant in Washington, D.C. A crowd gathered and chanted until she was forced to leave. Here is another report from June 26, 2018. The Florida Attorney General was harassed at a movie theater. A crowd surrounded her, screaming and acting aggressively. He put the news clippings on the table. Form a crowd, push back, and tell them they aren't welcome. They did precisely what you commanded them to do. Her voice turned entirely rigid. I never once called for violence. Let me read you the official dictionary definition of incitement. The investigator opened a legal reference book. Incitement means the act of provoking unlawful behavior or urging someone to act illegally. It means to agitate, to urge into action, or to instigate. He slammed the book shut. You commanded your supporters to hunt down cabinet officials at gas stations and restaurants with their families and form aggressive mobs. You commanded them to push back. What exactly did you think was going to happen? He brought out more of her controversial quotes. Let's examine the pattern here. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This is exactly who you are. He started reading from the list. In 2017, you said you were going to take out the president, which is an incredibly interesting choice of words. In 2018, you delivered the cabinet confrontation speech we just went over. In 2019, you called the president the most dishonorable and despicable human being to ever hold the office. In 2020, you led a mob chanting "No justice, no peace," just weeks before cities started burning. In 2021, during a major trial, you traveled to Minneapolis and declared protesters needed to get more confrontational if the jury didn't deliver a guilty verdict. The judge overseeing that exact trial called your comments completely abhorrent. He dropped the stack of quotes onto the table. It is a clear pattern, ma'am. It has been years of inflammatory rhetoric, years of pushing confrontation, and years of stoking anger while you sit totally safe inside your gated mansion. He pulled up a new set of financial records. Speaking of safety, let's talk about personal protection. He displayed the security expense receipts. You have actively demanded defunding local police departments. You have labeled law enforcement as fundamentally racist. You have pushed for fewer cops on the streets and less money for public safety programs. He pointed directly at the financial figures. Your own private security team is paid for by taxpayers and political donors. Over the last 4 years, the bill came to $762,000. He let that massive number sink in. That is more than $750,000 just to keep you safe. You get armed guards, highly trained professionals, and round-the-clock protection. He glared at her. You get police protection while your voters get fewer cops. That perfectly summarizes your philosophy. Safety for me, but not for you. He brought up one final comparative document. On January 6, 2021, you voted to impeach the president for inciting an insurrection just because he told his followers to march peacefully to the Capitol and make their voices heard. He showed the transcript of that speech right next to her own quotes from 2018. He said to march peacefully. You said to form mobs and push back. He got impeached, yet you faced absolutely zero consequences. He laid both documents flat on the desk. The only real difference between your incitement and what you accused him of doing is that your political side avoided charges. However, the words and the underlying intent were exactly the same. It was actually much worse because you specifically ordered crowds to harass individuals and make them feel unwelcome. The politician was breathing heavily now as her calm exterior was completely crumbling. You cannot compare those things. As I was talking about peaceful, this is a racially motivated attack against a black woman who, I am taking back my time. The investigator's voice boomed across the chamber, hurling her own words right back at her. That is exactly what you always say, isn't it? Whenever anyone tries to hold you accountable, you scream racism, sexism, or witch hunt just to dodge the actual question. He leaned closer to the microphone. You have been hiding behind those exact excuses for 32 years. Well, today those excuses simply aren't working anymore. He cracked open the final major section of his files. And that brings us to the most important question of all. It is the one question your voters have been asking for decades. After 32 years, after all the loud speeches, the empty promises, and the fake outrage, what have you actually accomplished for them? He paused for a moment before diving into the final section. This represented the emotional heart of the entire case. It was the sole reason anything else even mattered. Let's review your political legacy, ma'am. You have spent 32 years in office, representing the exact same neighborhoods for nearly a third of a century. What have you actually managed to achieve? He pulled out her legislative history files. I had my team compile a comprehensive list of major bills authored by you that actually became law and directly helped your voters. He held up an incredibly thin folder. He flipped through the sparse pages. Most of them were totally blank or just contained trivial nonsense. You renamed post offices, passed congratulatory resolutions, and issued ceremonial proclamations. That makes up the vast majority of it. He dropped the thin folder onto the desk. Over 3 decades, you have managed to rename some buildings and pass meaningless resolutions. Your area still lacks a brand new hospital. It still lacks major infrastructure improvements. It still lacks any jobs programs that actually deliver results. He pulled out her entire legislative voting record. Let me be extremely specific here. In 32 years, the number of major bills you authored that became law and created jobs locally is exactly 0. The number of infrastructure projects you secured specifically for your neighborhoods is exactly 2, and they were just minor street repairs. The number of successful housing initiatives you authored sits at absolute 0. He compared her record against other lawmakers. Congressman Jim Clyburn represents a similarly impoverished area in South Carolina, yet he secured over $3 billion in federal investments for his people. Congressman Benny Thompson brought hundreds of millions of dollars into the Mississippi Delta. Those represent actual numbers, genuine improvements, and real-world results. He glared back at her. What exactly did you deliver to your people? You delivered loud speeches, fake rage, cable news appearances, and a personal bank account that swelled by $4 million. He brought up local economic statistics. Let me show you something else, ma'am, just 2 sets of numbers. He wrote the figures on a presentation board. In 1991, the poverty level in your district sat at 23%, unemployment was 11%, and the average household income adjusted for inflation was $38,000. He wrote the second column of data. In 2024, the poverty level is 21%, unemployment sits at 9%, and the average income is $44,000. He stepped back from the board. Over 32 years, poverty improved by a mere 2 points, unemployment dropped by 2 points, and average pay rose by just $6,000. That doesn't represent progress, ma'am. That represents statistical noise. That is the definition of total stagnation. He pulled out comparative statistics from other regions. Let me show you what genuine political representation actually looks like. The 3rd Congressional District over in Georgia shared similar demographics back in the 90s, struggling with high poverty, failing schools, and a total lack of economic opportunity. Over that exact same 30-year window, poverty there plummeted by 8 points, while average income jumped by over $15,000 when adjusted for inflation. He presented yet another example. Newark, New Jersey was once considered totally hopeless, facing the exact same struggles as your area. But with engaged local leadership and politicians who actually drafted legislation instead of just yelling into microphones, the entire city transformed. Poverty dropped 9 points, crime fell massively, and new businesses brought fresh jobs and renewed hope. He laid the comparative data flat on the desk. It is entirely possible to actually help struggling communities like yours, ma'am. Other cities have pulled it off, and other politicians have successfully done it. It just requires caring more about the people who elected you than you care about booking television interviews. He pointed back to his earlier notes regarding her massive wealth. But your personal net worth exploded from $200,000 to over $4 million. Your kid pocketed more than $1 million. Your spouse's financial portfolio was saved by $12 million in taxpayer bailouts. He connected all the distinct data points. Your household got incredibly rich, while your voting district stayed completely broke. 32 years in office, and that is your entire legacy. He queued up a final video montage. Let me show you exactly what your voters think about that legacy. The monitor showed an elderly woman sitting inside a tiny apartment in Watts. I have voted for her in every single election since 1992. 30 years, and my neighborhood looks much worse today than when she first started out. Her voice began to crack with emotion. I sent her campaign $20 every single month for 15 straight years, totaling $3,600. That was money I could have spent on my medication, on groceries, or on my grandkids. And where did all that cash go? It went straight into her daughter's fake business. She wiped tears from her eyes. I truly believed in her, and I thought she was fighting for us, but she was only fighting for herself. The video shifted to a middle-aged man standing on a shattered sidewalk in South Los Angeles. My grandmother voted for her, my mother voted for her, and I voted for her. 3 entire generations, and what do we actually have to show for it? He pointed toward the crumbling urban decay surrounding him. We have the exact same broken roads, the exact same failing schools, and the exact same empty promises. Meanwhile, her luxury mansion just kept getting bigger, her daughter just kept getting richer, and we ended up with absolutely nothing. The video transitioned to a 56-year-old small business owner. I mailed her office 6 different times begging for help regarding permits, ridiculous regulations, and the bureaucracy that was slowly killing my shop. Do you want to know what I got in return? I got standard form letters. I received the exact same generic form letter 6 different times. She shook her head in total disgust. She doesn't care about us at all. We are nothing more than votes to her. We are just numbers on a page, just a tool to keep her in power so her family can keep cashing in. The video finally ended. The investigator let the heavy silence linger in the room for a moment. Those are your actual constituents, ma'am. Those are the exact people you claim to have represented for 32 years. Those are the people whose deep trust you completely betrayed. Those are the people whose hard-earned money you funneled directly into your family's pockets. He brought forth one final piece of damning evidence. And here is what you truly think about them behind closed doors. He held up a digital audio recording device. This audio was captured during a private fundraising event in Bel Air back in September 2022. It was hosted inside a mansion that cost more than every single house on any block in your entire district combined. He pressed play on the recording. Her distinct voice echoed through the room, speaking directly to extremely wealthy donors. These folks back in the district don't actually need real policy. They don't even understand complex policy. They simply need someone to act angry on their behalf, someone to just scream at the right targets. That is exactly what I provide them, pure anger. Real hope is only for people who can actually afford it. Laughter from the wealthy donors could be heard in the background. They will keep voting for me forever because they have nowhere else to turn. And as long as I keep pretending to fight the battles they want to see fought, they never actually ask any questions about my lack of results. The audio recording finally ended. The massive chamber fell completely dead silent. His voice was incredibly quiet now, sounding almost sorrowful. Hope is only for people who can afford it. That is exactly what you said about the folks you represent, the people who handed you their votes, their deep trust, and their dreams. He stared right into her eyes. You built an entire career on keeping your people broke and furious, ma'am. Because broke, furious people don't ever ask the hard questions. They never demand actual results. They simply need a scapegoat to blame, and you have always been more than happy to give them a target, just as long as that target wasn't you. He started packing up his massive pile of evidence. There is a specific term for someone exactly like you. It describes someone who gets incredibly wealthy while keeping their own people destitute. It describes someone who profits endlessly from human suffering while pretending to battle against it. It describes someone who completely exploits the exact people they swore an oath to serve. He paused for a dramatic effect. Poverty profiteer. That is the exact phrase, and it describes you perfectly. Politician completely exploded. How dare you? You don't know the first thing about my community. You're just a white guy who has never walked down my streets or seen what my people endure every single day. I personally built that entire community, and I was the one who finally gave them a voice. She was practically screaming now, with every last ounce of her composure totally destroyed. Without my leadership, they would have absolutely nothing at all. I have fought tooth and nail for them for 32 long years, and you think you can just march in here and I won't fight?" He patiently waited for her to run out of oxygen. "Without you, ma'am, they might actually elect someone who genuinely helps them instead of simply cashing in on their misery." He slammed the final folder shut. "Without you, they might actually get a politician who lives right there among them instead of hiding out inside a luxury mansion miles away. Without you, that elderly woman might have kept the $3,600 she donated and spent it on her own family instead of bankrolling your kids' home renovations." He stood up from his chair. "Your run is officially over, ma'am. 32 years of it, and the folks you robbed are finally taking it all back." The energy inside the chamber had shifted drastically. The entire atmosphere felt completely different now. Even the liberal lawmakers sitting on the panel refused to make eye contact with her. "Before we move to the official vote on a criminal referral, I have one last piece of information to submit," he announced. He pulled out an official document bearing the FBI's logo. "Your daughter Karen has been actively cooperating with federal agents for 4 solid months." The politician froze completely solid. All the color instantly drained out of her face. She handed over all the internal emails, the banking ledgers, and the digital messages proving you personally ordered those inflated payouts. "Everything I laid out here today regarding your family enterprise came directly from her." "You are completely lying." Her voice emerged as barely a faint whisper. "She inked a formal cooperation deal back in March." He held the official paperwork high in the air. "Her signature is clearly visible right there at the bottom. Your own flesh and blood decided that going to federal prison simply wasn't worth protecting your political career anymore. She was staring down severe charges for money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Flipping was her only realistic way out of this mess." She stared blankly at the ink on the page. It was unmistakably her daughter's handwriting. The very child she had dragged into her corrupt political business had actually turned on her. Karen wouldn't ever do this to her. She simply couldn't do this to her, yet she actually did do it. She handed over 4 years' worth of emails, banking statements, and text logs. She spilled everything to the federal agents. She explained exactly how the cash transfers worked, how the billing statements were artificially inflated, and how you personally greenlit every single shady transaction. He tossed the signed cooperation deal back onto the desk. "The people you trusted most are flipping on you, ma'am. Your own child already folded, so the only remaining question is who will be the next to break." A committee aide quietly slid a piece of paper over to the ranking Democratic panel member. She reviewed it, closed her eyes for a brief second, and then finally spoke up. "I have a formal statement to read into the official congressional record on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus." The accused politician whipped her head around in pure shock. The CBC was her inner circle, her political base, and the very coalition she had spent 3 decades building. The ranking member read the text extremely carefully. While the caucus highly respects the representative's decades of public service, the devastating evidence presented here today raises massive questions that demand a thorough, independent federal investigation. We cannot and will not stand in the way of legitimate congressional oversight regarding such serious potential misconduct. We strongly urge our esteemed colleague to cooperate fully and completely with federal investigators." She looked as though someone had just slapped her completely across the face. "After everything I sacrificed for them, after everything I built, they are just abandoning me? They are absolutely not protecting you anymore, ma'am." His voice sounded almost entirely gentle now. "Nobody is going to protect you anymore." A Democratic senator cleared his throat loudly. "I must admit, after reviewing everything shown here today regarding the massive family payouts, the federal bank bailout, and her luxury lifestyle compared to the conditions in her district, I firmly believe a formal criminal referral to the Justice Department is entirely appropriate and totally necessary." Another senator quickly nodded in agreement. "I completely agree, as these deeply troubling questions demand real answers that only a proper federal probe can uncover." One by one, the Liberal members sitting on the panel voiced their total support for a massive investigation. It wasn't every single one of them, but it was more than enough to seal her fate. She tried to mount one last desperate defense. "This is nothing but a modern-day lynching." Her voice trembled violently. "This is a purely political lynching targeting a black woman who simply dared to speak truth to extreme power. You will not ever silence me, and you will not destroy everything I have fought to build. I have literally dedicated my entire life to—" "Your daughter isn't white, ma'am." His voice easily sliced right through her, screaming. "Your former allies inside the CBC are definitely not conservatives. The mountain of evidence we presented today isn't racially motivated in any way. The $25 donations scrounged together by your housekeeper are definitely not part of some massive right-wing conspiracy." He stared at her with an unflinching, steady gaze. "You are absolutely not being lynched here today. You are finally being held completely accountable for your own actions. For the very first time in 32 long years, somebody is finally taking back the time you stole from your own voters." The panel chairman loudly called for the official vote. "All those in favor of formally referring this massive scandal to the Department of Justice for a full criminal probe, please vote now." The final tally rolled in at 14-7, a highly bipartisan and totally decisive absolute crushing blow. She watched every single vote land like a brutal physical punch to the gut. The conservatives voted yes exactly as she expected, but the liberals did too. Members of her very own political party, colleagues who had sat right next to her for years, had officially turned their backs on her. The motion officially carries. This committee will immediately draft a formal criminal referral to the DOJ focusing heavily on massive campaign finance violations, extreme self-dealing, massive potential bank fraud, and a total abuse of political office. The chairman looked directly down at her. "Representative, you are strongly advised to secure extremely good legal representation. This official congressional hearing is now completely adjourned." The wooden gavel slammed down hard. She sat frozen in her seat for a very long minute. At 84 years of age, the sheer physical effort required just to stand up was painfully obvious. Her legs shook uncontrollably, her hands trembled violently. She had marched into this exact room feeling like an absolute titan. She boasted 32 years of massive power, striking deep fear into her colleagues, drawing massive cheers from her loyal fans, and feeling completely untouchable. She limped out feeling incredibly diminished, incredibly old, and completely alone. Her own flesh and blood had brutally betrayed her. Her loyal political coalition had completely abandoned her. Her vaunted political legacy now sat in absolute flaming ruins. There would be no more taking back her floor time. Her time and power had finally completely expired. The dramatic video clips spread across the internet like a raging wildfire. Within a single hour, the explosive footage was playing literally everywhere. The clips featured her screaming wildly about a lynching, the stunning moment the CBC statement dropped, the shocking revelation regarding her daughter's federal cooperation deal, and her final pathetic shuffle out of the hearing room. Within 2 hours, the phrase "poverty profiteer" was trending massively nationwide. Cable news networks switched over to continuous, non-stop, wall-to-wall coverage. Political commentators who had spent long decades branding her an absolute icon suddenly struggled to find any words at all. Within 3 hours, angry protesters began swarming outside her luxury Hancock Park estate. They weren't her loyal fans, but rather furious former voters demanding real answers. Down in Watts, over in Willowbrook, and deep inside the neglected neighborhood she claimed to champion for 3 decades, huge crowds gathered around television screens inside local barbershops, neighborhood churches, and crowded community centers. The public reactions were entirely different from what the political experts had confidently predicted. Dorothy Williams sat inside her tiny apartment, glued to the news broadcast while clutching the massive stack of donation receipts she had accumulated over 15 years. "I honestly knew something was deeply wrong," she muttered quietly to herself. "I think I secretly always knew it, but I just desperately wanted to believe her." I simply needed to believe that someone out there was actually fighting for us. She slowly and methodically ripped the donation receipts into tiny shreds. I was an absolute fool. We were all absolute fools. Down in South Los Angeles, Marcus Johnson stood firmly on the exact same shattered concrete sidewalk where he had filmed his angry video testimony. 32 entire years, he told the local reporters who had finally tracked him down. That covers basically my entire life, and she was busy getting incredibly filthy rich the whole damn time. She got rich exploiting our votes, exploiting our deep pain, and exploiting our desperate hope. He aggressively kicked at a massive chunk of broken concrete. Do you want to know what the truly worst part of all this really is? We will probably just go out and elect someone exactly like her all over again. Because that is simply how this corrupt political machine actually works. That is exactly how it always works. Inside a packed community center down in Compton, a tight circle of elderly women who had served as her most reliable voting bloc sat in completely stunned, totally deafening silence while watching the endless news replays. I defended that woman with my entire life, one of them finally spoke up. I defended her for decades against absolutely everyone who criticized her. I branded them all as massive racists whenever they dared to question her record. I constantly called them all a bunch of dirty liars. She sadly shook her head from side to side. I was incredibly wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. Later that exact same evening, Dan Bongino sat quietly inside his parked vehicle outside the massive Capitol building with the engine turned completely off, just watching the sun slowly set through his front windshield. He vividly remembered her walking into that massive hearing room earlier that afternoon. He remembered the extreme arrogance, the blatant contempt, and the absolute unshakable certainty that her 32 years of extreme political power made her completely untouchable. He thought deeply about the broken people trapped inside her voting district. He thought about Dorothy Williams clutching her 15 years' worth of utterly useless political donation receipts. He thought about Marcus Johnson dealing with 3 entire generations of completely shattered political trust. He thought about the countless kids who had grown up completely destitute while their elected leader got incredibly filthy rich. Reclaiming my time. That was her famous catchphrase, her personal political brand, and the exact words she constantly used to aggressively silence anyone who ever dared to challenge her terrible record. But the truth was that it had never actually been her time to reclaim in the first place. It had always truly belonged to her neglected voters. It was their stolen time, their shattered hopes, their completely ruined futures, and their massive piles of $25 donations scraped together from absolutely nothing. She had aggressively stolen every single bit of it, and finally someone had stepped up and forcefully taken it all right back. His cell phone suddenly vibrated with a text message from his wife. "How are you feeling right now?" He sat there thinking deeply for a long minute before finally typing out his response. "I feel like I actually did my job today. I feel like someone finally held one of these incredibly corrupt politicians totally accountable for their actions. But mostly I just feel like this is merely one single corrupt politician out of hundreds who all do the exact same terrible things." Her digital reply popped up almost immediately. "We have to take them down one at a time." That is exactly how this process works. He fired up his engine and finally started driving toward his home. Tomorrow would inevitably bring more massive federal investigations. There would surely be more explosive congressional hearings. There would be plenty more corrupt politicians who had completely betrayed their sacred oaths and utterly destroyed the innocent people who foolishly trusted them. The grueling work was simply never truly finished. But tonight, at the very least, there was finally a tiny shred of genuine justice. It was a small and completely incomplete victory, but it was incredibly real nonetheless. Exactly 2 weeks later, Maxine Waters officially announced her immediate retirement from the United States Congress. Her carefully worded press release cited vague health issues and a sudden strong desire to spend more quality time with her remaining family. It completely failed to mention the massive, sprawling federal corruption probe. It totally refused to acknowledge any sort of political or criminal wrongdoing whatsoever. It absolutely did not apologize to Dorothy Williams, Marcus Johnson, or the countless thousands of other desperate voters who had foolishly trusted her with their ballots, their hard-earned cash, and their fragile hopes. The massive federal criminal probe rapidly expanded. Federal grand juries were quickly convened. Huge stacks of massive legal subpoenas were aggressively issued. Karen Waters' federal cooperation deal proved to be incredibly extensive and utterly devastating to the family empire. Over in the 43rd Congressional District of California, a special emergency election was officially announced to quickly fill the suddenly totally vacant congressional seat. A totally new crop of eager political candidates quickly emerged. Some of them loudly promised the exact same empty thing she had always promised. Others passionately promised to deliver something completely different this time around. Dorothy Williams, now 78 years old, officially registered to vote in the upcoming special election. It would mark her absolute first time casting a ballot for someone other than her former hero in over 3 decades. Maybe this completely new person will actually be totally different, she muttered quietly without holding on to much genuine hope. Maybe this totally new politician will actually fight incredibly hard for us, she noted after pausing briefly. Or maybe they will just turn out to be exactly like her. Maybe they will just get incredibly wealthy while we stay completely broke, giving loud, empty speeches while absolutely nothing ever actually changes. She shrugged her shoulders heavily. But I'm going to cast my ballot anyway, simply because that is literally all we have ever got. That is literally all we have ever genuinely had. Outside her window, the cracked streets of Watts looked exactly the same as they had for 32 long years. The shattered concrete sidewalks remained, local businesses continued to struggle mightily, and massive families remained doubled up inside tiny, cramped apartments because they simply couldn't afford the sky-high local rent prices. The crushing extreme poverty, unfortunately, still remained. The massive, deeply rooted systemic problems stubbornly persisted. But the deeply corrupt woman who had gotten incredibly wealthy by exploiting all of it was finally completely gone forever. And for the very first time in over 3 decades, there was finally at least the tiny possibility of something totally different. There was the tiny possibility of something vastly better, something incredibly real, and some actual time that finally truly belonged completely to the voters themselves.